Welcome to Erupt. I'm your host, LaBruna, and today we're talking about toxic ingredients in our food. And not just any food, baby food. A recent report found that baby food manufacturers were including toxic heavy metals in baby products, and that some of those companies included Gerber. And joining me today to discuss this is Los Angeles environmental attorney Vineet Dubey. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So we're going to start with some of the foods in question that comes from Gerber products in a monthly subscription program that showed that the ingredients in there included lead, and exposure to lead with these babies being fed this food could include lead neurological development problems for up to a third of their lifetime. So just starting with those products specifically, how did they come to your attention, and how did consumers sort of find out what real products were in these foods?
Yeah, you touched on it very well. Lead consumption in infants is a huge issue, and it's extremely scary because it affects every aspect of an infant's neurological development, their IQ, their intelligence, their sight, their hearing. So any kind of lead intake during, those developmental months is extremely important. And what we found was Gerber is selling two different products, two baby foods that are targeted at 6, 7, and 8-month-old children. Uh, they both come in a subscribe and save model where parents can get up to 10 units of each one every month. And, if you have a child, I have two little young ones. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. You know that when they're 6 months old, when you find a food that they'll eat and they'll eat well, you're more apt to buy it and you're more apt to feed it to them continuously, right? So parents are more apt to order these products on a subscription model. And if a parent gets 10 units of this in a month and feeds their 6-month-old child all 10 units in 1 month, they're exposed to lead poisoning for 1 month out of those 6 months of their life. For 30 days of their young, short life, they're poisoned by lead. And that's scary. Think about, a 7-month-old who has 2 months worth of that product. I mean, that's a third of their life that they're lead poisoned. I work with an environmental agency called Ecological Alliance, and they do quite a bit of testing for food products and other things, and they bring them to my attention so that I can litigate and bring cases when companies are selling toxic products. So they tested these two Gerber products. We found the levels of lead were high and very unsafe for infants, and then we filed the lawsuit. And our hopes, we can talk more about what our hopes are, but that's how we found out about them.
Right. So you teamed up with California-based company you just mentioned, Ecological Alliance, that looked into this. So you're saying that's what brought you there, and yes, you filed a lawsuit. Can you explain to us what you're claiming in the lawsuit and really what your goals are coming out of it?
Sure. So we're claiming that Gerber is selling these products that are dangerous with levels of lead that are higher than allowed in California. There are no federal standards, and that's something we'll get into regarding. It's crazy that there's no federal standards for lead in baby food, much less just the food supply in general. And that's something the FDA needs to get on top of. But in California, there's a level of 0.5 micrograms a day that adults are allowed to intake. So you can't sell a product that's going to expose an adult to over 0.5 micrograms a day. So that's the standard we're using here. What we found through our testing was that these two Gerber products were exposing 1.7, 1.8 micrograms a day is how much was in one serving. And that's for an adult. So for an infant to be taking that in every day, much less on the subscribe and save model, it's crazy and it's scary and it's going to cause a lot of issues for a lot of kids out there. So we filed a lawsuit under California's Proposition 65, which is a warning law, which basically says if you're selling a product that contains toxic chemicals, you either take it off the shelves, you reformulate that product and take the chemicals out, or you place a warning label on that product and sell it so people are aware. And that's the law that we brought this lawsuit under. Our goal is to have Gerber take the products off the shelves and not sell them unless they have less than 5 parts per billion lead. And that's an amount that's so small that even for infants, they're going to be okay. If Gerber can't reformulate the product or refuses to take the lead out, then they'll need to place warning labels on these products if they're going to be sold again in California. So at least the parent can know, right? I mean, if you see a baby food on the shelf and it says warning, this product contains lead, chances are you're not going to buy it for your kids, right? So if there's a warning label on the products it's going to make them safer because less parents are going to buy them. Or, we're going to make Gerber reformulate the product and take the lead out.
You bring up an interesting point that the FDA has no limit for lead in babies, but I think a lot of people are like, why would they have a limit for lead in babies? Why would babies even have access to lead in their food? But here we are. And just to give our audience a little context here, I'm going to cite one of the actual foods in question here with the subscription program. It's the Gerber sweet potato, apple, carrot, cinnamon baby food, which sounds so nice, right? It just sounds like some wholesome ingredients. Your
Sounds
baby's
delicious.
going to eat well, some apples and cinnamon.
Yeah.
But it exposes to a baby to, you brought up the 0.5 micrograms of lead is for adults. It exposes a baby to 1.7 micrograms of lead, which is over 3 times the daily limit for a 4-ounce serving. So clearly the stakes are super high in this situation. And you talk about Proposition 65 as well. I'm sort of interested here to learn how Gerber even gets around this California law specifically. I know Gerber is a national company, doesn't actually just apply to California, but when it comes to Proposition 65, is this something companies are subject to or they have to already apply to? How did Gerber find a way around it?
So Proposition 65, they are subject, any company that's selling goods into the state of California to California consumers must comply with Prop 65. The issue is Prop 65 isn't a before you sell a product you have to show us proof that there aren't chemicals kind of law. It's a law where if a consumer finds out, if we test and find out that there are toxic chemicals in the law, then in the product, then you can bring a lawsuit, and then you can kind of force the companies to change. In terms of specifically food products and lead, there was a case in California maybe 6 or 7 years ago called Beech Nut. And what that case was terrible for lead in food. What I think it was very wrongly decided. A lot of very big food companies had very big, very good corporate defense attorneys, and they won a trial, and they convinced a judge that when you're looking at lead in food, you should look at the effects over a period of 30 days or 60 days or 90 days and average how much an average consumer would actually eat that product, as opposed to what we did before was you looked at one day. If a food that you eat in one day exceeds the level of lead, that food was outlawed by Prop 65. So that case, that Beech Nut case, is the loophole that all these big companies are using to sell products and sell food products that have lead in them still in California. So, we're fighting to try to get that overturned with our lawsuits. If I can find the right judge and we can find the right case, maybe it's this Gerber case. If we can get that Beech Nut case overturned, then it'll be a lot harder for companies to sell products that have lead in them.
Right. And when we're talking about these companies, I think a lot of it has to do with the name, right? Everyone knows Gerber baby food. Everyone knows the Gerber baby. I don't have children, but I would think if I'm going to get baby food, Gerber would be a great one to trust because it's been around forever. And interestingly enough, in a statement with Ecological Alliance, they said, quote, no baby food is as woven into the history of American families as Gerber. Gerber relies on that legacy of trust. So that being said, trust is key. That's a big concern for parents. How do you navigate the reality that some of these companies that so many people have trusted for so long, maybe not even just false advertising, but maybe just lying to us and concealing what's actually in our food?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, Gerber, think about it. Everybody in America knows the Gerber baby, and they've known the Gerber baby for the last 50, 60, 70 years, right? I mean, Gerber truly is the most trusted name in baby food. And when a company like Gerber is putting the bottom line over consumers' health, you have a huge issue. And this is a bigger issue in terms of how corporate America interacts with the public and whether the bottom line is the most important thing or whether selling safe products to consumers is the most important thing. We've really got to a point where the bottom line for these companies takes precedence to anything else. And it's scary because we're talking about products that we feed ourselves and we feed our kids. And this kind of stuff has lifelong effects, right? If you're 6 months old and you take in a month's worth of lead, then your intelligence is never going to reach its peak in your entire life. Your hearing may not reach its peak. You're going to have behavioral issues throughout your life, and that affects everything you can do. So it's a huge trust issue. What can parents do? put pressure on your congressman. It's such a big issue. There has to be federal regulation. Congress has to set standards, and Congress has to enforce it. We're doing what we can. We're suing companies every time we find a violation, but nothing's going to make an actual change unless Congress gets involved and passes the Food Safety Act. And so right now that's pending in Congress. Their goal is to put in regulations within the next 3 to 5 years, so we have standards for lead in baby food. And that should happen next year. Why are we waiting another 3 to 5 years? That's potentially hundreds of thousands of kids that are going to be poisoned by lead before these standards are enacted. So, one thing you can do is call your congressman, make sure they're pushing for the Food Safety Act to get passed ASAP. Another thing they can do is avoid foods with sweet potatoes. For whatever reason, all of our testing has found sweet potatoes just leach lead out of the soil and bring it into the products that they're put in. So one of the main things you can do is any baby foods, any pouches, any foods for toddlers, try to stay away from sweet potatoes. That's a big one that brings lead into these products.
That's a great fact. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful and surprising, right? And sweet potatoes, everyone loves sweet potatoes. Good vegetable for you.
Right?
But yeah, interesting to know that. And I want to bring up too, there was a House Oversight Subcommittee report, and there's a lot of different findings, again, along the same lines that there was toxic heavy metals in these baby food products. But was the most shocking really of all is that the manufacturers of these baby foods themselves are able to set their own standards for what can be allowed in their food and then essentially ignore the standard of what's in their food and continue selling them even though they know that there's toxic ingredients there. So you talked about corporate America, that being a problem in corporate America as well, but clearly we're seeing that that's a huge issue in the food industry as well. If the industry allows these manufacturers to control levels and allows it to essentially go unchecked, how are we ever going to really be able to find that balance of truly understanding what's safe in our food? Because clearly the manufacturers aren't going to do it for us.
Yeah, we're not. Anytime a big industry has been allowed to police itself, they failed, right? Look at the financial industry before the 2008 crisis. If we didn't mandate that cars had to put in seatbelts and cars had to be more safe back in the day in the 50s and 60s, we would have hundreds of thousands of more accidents every year on the road. Industries can't be left to police themselves. Congress has to step in. The FDA has to step in. They have to pass these laws to set standards, but they also need to make sure that there's strong penalties and there's investigations to make sure that these companies are complying. It's such a big problem. It has to be done on a national scale. If you allow Gerber, if you allow Beech Nut, if you allow Plum Organics, we have another lawsuit against Nurture Inc., which makes Happy Top products. Same deal. They make products for toddlers chock full of lead, right? So if you allow these industries to police themselves, it's not going to get fixed. It's not going to change. Has to be congressional action on a national level.
Right. And you talk about things parents can do, congressional action, look out for sweet potatoes in your food. Are there any sort of companies, I know you mentioned that you have young children as well, that you found, or maybe your company has found, that are safer for children that you can actually trust? Because I think maybe that's what parents are looking for now. Where can we go? Who can we really trust?
Yeah, look, so we already talked about sweet potatoes. Parents should also look for certified organic products. If they're certified organic on the label, that's going to help. Unfortunately, I know it's a little more expensive. It may not always be an option. It may not always be affordable for a lot of parents out there. But if you get products that are certified organic, that definitely helps in terms of lead content and heavy metal content. Pick a particular brand. It's hard for me to say because so many of these brands, like you said, they're testing themselves and they're not following their own limits and their own testing. So certified organic helps a lot. Stay away from sweet potatoes. If parents will follow both of these, it'll help a lot.
Yeah, and I want to ask you as well, you brought up how under the California proposition, if consumer finds out that there is toxic ingredients in their products, they can go back and apply the Proposition 65 where they have to include a warning label. In your opinion, does that seem a little backward? Right? Like, shouldn't it be to begin with that we have to be upfront and honest about what our food, not that the consumer finds out after eating it for 5 months that there's something bad in it?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be great, ideally, it was a forward working proposition where companies had to maybe submit some compliance reports or testing to show that their products don't contain these chemicals before. But realistically, I mean, there's so many products that come through to
Right.
California that
So is
there's
that
no
just,
agencies that can do it. You know,
yeah, so it's just like out of the scope of truly like
yeah,
the reality.
I don't think it's feasible for it to work that way. I mean, the Attorney General's Office of California oversees Prop 65. So whenever, let's say, I bring a lawsuit, we have to submit our evidence that it's a valid lawsuit, that we have test results, that we've looked at the product, that it contains the chemicals to the Attorney General's office. And they kind of look at it and sign off on the suit and make sure it's all valid and that it's a quality lawsuit. But that's even then, they're stretched to capacity trying to look at the lawsuits and try to make sure everything's in order. So, in an ideal world, yeah, it'd be great if it worked the other way, but it's just not feasible for that to happen. We don't have a governmental organization that has the manpower and the money to do that.
Right. And I want to
But
bring
you know
up,
who does? You know who does? The FDA, the federal government. If they enact their standards, they have the money, they have the manpower. They can do that. They can regulate and make sure companies are testing before products go on the market.
right. So that I think is the big question. Like we all want to really know. We talked before the show how you can look at like a US kind of ketchup and then a ketchup over in England, and it's so many fewer products and ingredients and it looks more natural. But the FDA is the one who's allowing, I think you said 28 ingredients in our ketchup. Is there a way, that's I think really the question there. Is there a way to get them to actually take on the actual responsibility of what they're supposed to do as the Food and Drug Administration to do something for Americans? Because obviously it's not just baby food. It's a lot of different kinds of foods out there.
Yeah, no question about it. And that's a great question. How do we get the FDA to not be in business with big business, right? How do we make sure that all these huge companies that are paying millions and millions of dollars a year for lobbying, don't affect oversight and regulation? I mean, you have to vote for politicians that are going to take a strong stand against big business, right? It has to be a grassroots effort. If every parent, see, this is something that cuts across all lines, right? Whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, whatever racial group you're from, whatever socioeconomic class you're from, every parent has to feed their kid baby food, right? Every parent wants their kid to be healthy. This is something that every single parent in America should talk to their congressman and say, make sure there's no lead in our baby food, right? Make sure the FDA is not in bed with these companies. Make sure they're actually regulating them so our kids can grow up healthy. So, it's got to come from the grassroots. It's got to come from parents electing the right people and speaking to their congressmen and putting pressure on Washington. I can't think of a single issue. Think about all the stuff that Congress is working on, all the stuff you hear in the news every day. What's more important than what we're feeding our kids? What's more important than making sure they're not exposed to lead poisoning, which detrimentally affects them for the rest of their life as they're trying to be productive citizens in our country? I don't think there's anything, but there's not enough pressure on congressmen to realize, look, this is what you're supposed to do. This is Congress is right. The federal government is supposed to ensure our safety and our kids' safety. To me, there's nothing more important than all this crazy stuff you hear on the news every day, all this division. If they would focus on stuff like this that affects every single American, we could get it done, and we could make sure the FDA polices these companies properly, and we can get the lead out of our food supply. But it's got to be a constant drumbeat from every parent in the country. Honestly, that's what will
Right.
get it.
And from what you're making so many great points there, I think from what stems from that is a lot is education. So sometimes people just don't know, right? I would never think that Gerber baby food had lead in it. And then you start hearing all these news reports and information, and you're like, wow, how did I not know this? So I want to read a few statistics for you. According to the CDC survey, it revealed 48% of Americans never or rarely seek information about where their food was grown or how it was produced. And according to the CDC, 48 million Americans become sick from foodborne illnesses every year. So obviously that could be tied to one another. And reports from an online survey commissioned by the Innovation Center of U.S. Dairy showed 16 million people think chocolate comes from brown cows, and 40% of California fourth, fifth, and sixth graders don't know that hamburgers come from cows. So clearly, there's in the food industry, in the education industry, about how we're teaching people and children about food, it's really important to bridge that gap. So How do you think
Absolutely.
Americans and America in general can work towards understanding a healthy balance of what food is and what to look for, if there is a way to do that at all?
Yeah, well, education and awareness, right? I mean, this kind of a thing, when we file a lawsuit, if I'm able to talk about lead in Gerber baby food, that's going to make parents aware, right? And as soon as parents are starting to think more about what's in the food they're feeding their children, hopefully for the rest of their kids' life, they'll be teaching them better food habits. And, schools have got to do a better job with nutrition, right? My wife is a doctor, and she went through medical school, and they didn't take a class on nutrition. Crazy, right? We're treating the diseases, but we're not treating the symptoms of why people get sick so much when we have a tainted food supply. So that's another conversation,
Right. No, it is.
but
It is a
it's
really
about
interesting
education and it's
information.
about awareness, and the more people are educated about what's in their food and how it affects their bodies, the more they're going to make smart decisions. And it's got to be taught to kids. It's got to be taught to parents. We got to have a lot of awareness like this about the what's actually in the food supply.
Right. Knowledge is power. I want to say
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Vineet, for being here this morning to share this with us. We wish you the best of luck, and we thank you for what you're doing to help keep America's children safe from baby food
Great. I
problems.
really appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and keep it up. Awareness and knowledge is the key, right?
Will do. Thanks so much.
Thank you.